You get dickheads in any society.
I never said that I thought it would be bad.
Are you high now?
Yeah.
Hey there, Stephen Stockwell with you for Hack. If someone has served this country, how much do we owe them in return? Well, young veterans are fighting the government for compensation.
Jesse's death was a statement, and it was a very clear statement.
The claims process is complicated. So complicated, one family says that their Jesse died over it.
Hack.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
On Triple J with Stephen Stockwell.
Fire, fury, and frankly, power.
There's some pretty big words from a very powerful man. The US president has had it up to the neck with the hermit state. He thinks they've got nuclear weapons they can put in a missile, which is kind of a big deal.
Clearly, there is this standoff between the two countries right now, with each side using increasingly harsh language toward the other.
Now, North Korea hasn't taken kindly to Trump's fire and fury comments.
The state-run news agency KCNA issuing a statement saying that North Korea's military is, quote, examining the operational plans to strike around Guam.
Guam is a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific, about halfway between Papua New Guinea and Japan. As well as being a popular holiday spot for Russian and Chinese tourists, it's a key US military base. The tip of the spear pointing at China, Russia, and North Korea.
So there is a direct threat to the United States here from the North Koreans. It doesn't get any more direct than that.
This threat is given more weight by a report in the Washington Post that says the rogue state has successfully produced a miniaturised nuclear warhead, one that would fit inside an intercontinental ballistic missile. North Korea started rattling its sabre a couple of days ago when the UN passed measures to make it harder for the country to make money.
Today, the full Security Council has come together to put the North Korean dictator on notice.
That resolution bans North Korean exports of coal, iron ore, lead and seafood, 1/3 of its total exports. But the US ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, warned on the weekend that we shouldn't start patting ourselves on the back just yet.
We should not fool ourselves into thinking we have solved the problem. Not even close.
The president's been very clear about it. He said he's not going to tolerate North Korea being able to threaten the United States.
The US president's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, told MSNBC after the Security Council vote that the US needs to be there to talk North Korea down.
What we have to do is everything we can to pressure this regime, to pressure Kim Jong-un and those around him, such that they conclude it is in their interest to denuclearize.
But it doesn't seem to have cooled things down too much, given the situation we've been watching unfold today.
All it's going to do is bring us closer to some kind of serious confrontation.
Former US presidential candidate Senator John McCain says Trump needs to be careful.
I think this is very, very, very serious. And I think that the rotund ruler in Pyongyang, he's not crazy, but he certainly is ready to go to the brink.
So how worried should we be? Well, we'll get into that a little deeper in just a moment. But a missile North Korea tested in July is thought to have a maximum range of 6,700 kilometres, which means it could reach Darwin. Sorry, guys.
Hack on Triple J with Stephen Stockwell.
I'm very keen for you to weigh in on this one. Should we try and have a constructive conversation with North Korea to talk them down, or should we just bomb the hell out of them? Give me a call, 1300 0555 36, or send me a text 0439 7555. Now, to get the inside line on North Korea, we're joined by Dr Benjamin Habib. He's a lecturer in politics and international relations at La Trobe Uni. His focus is on North Korea's nuclear program, which is exactly what we want to talk about. Ben, how worried should we be about nuclear war breaking out over North Korea?
Well, Trump's bluster, it sounds like the kind of outrageous language we'd expect to see from North Korean propaganda. At its best, Trump's overplaying his hand here. If he doesn't follow through with these threats, it could make the Americans look weak, which can damage the trust of US allies in the region in South Korea and Japan, who might wonder if the Americans will follow through on their security guarantee. And it's a free kick to China, who's battling the Americans for influence in the region. And at its worst, this kind of rhetoric backs the Americans into a corner and increases the likelihood of escalation into conflict. And so what do we see here? The North Korean threats against Guam. Needless to say, though, this is an unnecessary escalation in the language that's used here by Trump.
I mean, we've also seen, North Korea talking pretty tough in this situation as well. They say they've got missiles pointed at Guam. So, I mean, is this how a nuclear war starts?
Possibly. When both sides start talking tough, it increases the chances of escalation. It increases the chances of miscalculation. A lot of this depends on how people view the Kim regime. It's easy to caricature the Kims as crazy and irrational. We see cartoons of Kim with a nuclear missile penis, for example, that kind of thing, the Team America memes of his dad. But that's not necessarily a good way to look at North Korea. There is a discernible logic around why they want to have nuclear weapons. They picture themselves in a hostile regional environment where they see threats from other countries, and they see nuclear weapons as a way to defend themselves.
Do we need to be a bit careful about how we paint the North Koreans as this sort of crazed, off-the-hook rogue nation? Should we refrain from the nuclear weapon penises?
I guess there's 2 points to make here. One, there's a difference between capabilities and intentions. So just because they've got nuclear weapons, and it appears, from the DIA report that's come out today, that they've achieved a fully operational nuclear weapons capability, that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to start lobbing missiles at Guam or South Korea or the continental United States.
How significant is that development, though? They've been able to develop a nuclear weapon that can actually, has that capability, essentially?
Yeah, well, what that means is that, this is something called the nuclear shadow. Having nuclear weapons gives countries a level of diplomatic clout that they otherwise wouldn't have, and it means they can't be pushed around as much by larger countries. So, the North Koreans have been gunning for this for a while. This is not a shock result. They've been working towards this for 15 years. And it was pretty clear that they were going to reach this point at some point or another. It's possible that what they're trying to achieve, rather than actually attacking anyone, is to get greater leverage in eventual negotiations with the US over a peace treaty, a treaty to end the Korean War, which is still technically underway. There was never an official end to that war. And the North Koreans think that the nuclear capability gives them the chance to get the best deal and get a deal on paper that will stick, that the US can't renege on later on.
You're listening to Hack on Triple J. I'm Stephen Stockwell. I'm joined by Dr Benjamin Habib, who's a lecturer in politics and international relations at La Trobe University. His focus is on North Korea's nuclear programs. On the text line, it's almost like the US is trying to get everyone to go to war with North Korea. Another text here says, don't take the risk, bomb them. Another one here says, sounds like an arms race. Will the world ever learn? Imogen, on the Gold Coast, you've been to the demilitarised zone on the North Korean and South Korean border. You think they're a real threat?
Yeah, so I've actually been to the demilitarised zone and was lucky enough to be a part of the UN, and they took us down into some tunnels. So North Korea have built some tunnels that are trying to capture Seoul, and they've found 4, but they could still be building more.
Yeah, right. Ben, I want to come back to you for a second. I mean, we're here talking about this idea of, militarised nuclear weapon. Let's take a step back here. What exactly is that?
A miniaturised nuclear weapon. Okay, so North Korea's exploded 5 nuclear devices since 2006. So they've had the ability to explode a nuclear device since that time. But miniaturisation means being able to make a nuclear device that's small enough to fit on top of a missile. So a nuclear weapon isn't very useful unless you can accurately deliver it to a target. So that's the technical task that they've achieved here.
Imogen, I want to bring you back into this for a second. I mean, how serious do you think the threat is to other countries? I mean, obviously there's a threat to South Korea, but do you think other people should be worried as well? Do you think we should be worried?
Yeah, very much so. It's the US military presence is very current on the border, and any action could be taken, and they are set off quite easily.
Yeah, right. Hey, Ben, I want to come back to you as well. I mean, is there a legitimate risk to Australia here?
No. It's the short answer to that. I mean, think it through. What strategic influence does Australia have in the Korean Peninsula? It's very minimal. There's no real strategic target of any importance in Northern Australia that would have any bearing on this particular theatre. So, it's easy to look at these missile range maps that have the big radial circle around North Korea that showed how far missiles go. Just because we fit into that range doesn't mean we're a target. I mean, the North Pole's in that target. I don't think Santa Claus is mobilising against the North Koreans.
We do host a pretty decent US military presence up in Darwin as well, though. Wouldn't that make it a target?
Look, it's comparatively small. There's only a fourth of 1,000 Marines, and it's well known that they're not there for any reason related to dealing with North Korea. So, again, when you put your strategic analyst hat on, there's not really a credible threat to Australia here.
No dramas at all. And Ben, just to wrap up, just finally, is this a country we're going to be able to talk back down, we're going to be able to engage with and sort this out?
Talk back down, no, I don't think so. I think they've proven that they're really intent on acquiring this nuclear weapons capability. But talk to them, yes, we really should, because there's no other good way out of here. The military options are so high risk for trying to attack North Korea. I mean, the South Korean capital of Seoul is only about 40 kilometres from the DMZ, and it's indefensible against artillery and rocket attacks from the north. So that's why the Americans haven't attacked North Korea since the end of the Korean War, because the risk to their ally is too high. If you speak to a lot of people on the streets in South Korea, I mean, I was there 4 weeks ago. I was in the tunnels that Imogen was talking about 4 weeks ago. So they're not particularly impressed with the rhetoric that's coming from the Trump administration at the moment.
Ben, thanks for joining us on Hack.
My pleasure, Stephen. Thanks.
That's Dr Benjamin Habib, a lecturer in politics and international relations at La Trobe Uni. On the text line, this is a joke. Neither leaders will be impacted by this mentally or physically. It'll all be implanted on the innocent civilians. USA and North Korea need to chill out and evacuate South Korea and let it rain. Give South Korea the rest of the country and let them build it to its full potential.
Hack. I will tender my citizenship documents to the High Court to confirm that I was eligible to be elected as a senator to the Australian Parliament.
I believe he was very economical with the truth.
His story has changed more times than I've changed underpants.
On Triple J.
Remember last month when we had a sudden rash of senators resign because they all had dual citizenships? Well, there's still questions over One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts and his British citizenship. His own boss, Party Leader Pauline Hanson, has moved a motion in the Senate to have his case referred to the High Court. Malcolm Roberts has repeatedly said that he only holds Aussie citizenship. But yesterday, BuzzFeed published documents that showed he's been a British citizen in the past. If he didn't renounce that before standing for election, then under the Constitution, he is ineligible to be a senator. Watch this space.
Hack. I think they just want to ignore it and pretend it's not happening because it's happening to far too many.
Triple J.
War is hell, but for some veterans, coming back can be even harder. If you're carrying psychological injuries, it can be a real struggle finding a place at home. In a moment, we're going to talk about how hard it can be to get help and compensation for these kind of injuries. If you've struggled after serving, maybe you know someone who has, give me a call, 1300 0555 36, or send me a text, 0439 75 7555. First, Joe Lauder meets the family of a young man who came back from Afghanistan to a completely different battle. And a heads up, there's some strong language in here.
Well, I'd start by saying he was a beautiful, sensitive, intelligent boy that was ruined by the army.
He still said even recently he was glad he'd joined up and had all the experience he'd had. And he said himself, even with the PTSD, I'm glad I joined up. And as a mother, I'm not glad he joined up at all. He'd still be here with us.
Leisha and Ross are the devastated parents of Jason Grant. They say he'd been battling the demons of his time in Afghanistan for years, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. He died last month and his mum, Leisha, found him, and she believes it was an accidental overdose.
I know it wasn't intentional. It's every parent's worst nightmare. But I just try and be grateful we had him for 32 years.
Jason joined the Army in 2004 as a combat engineer known as a sapper and was in there for 9 years, and he was trained to clear explosives. He went on 2 tours of Afghanistan. After the first one, he was a bit edgy and hypervigilant, but when he came home after his second tour, he was unrecognisable. Not long before he was due home, Jason got caught in a one-on-one firefight with a Taliban insurgent when they were just metres apart. He survived by a matter of millimetres.
Jace got shot through the strap of his backpack.
Oh, and this is a strap.
That's a bullet hole.
Wow, it's like a giant gash.
Yeah.
That's millimetres. That's on the bottom side of the backpack strap.
He was left alone with the body to search it, and he was meant to find all the rounds, the shell casings, so he had to search for that as well. And he didn't get a lot of support when he got back to base. And
in what way?
The commanding officer just said, harden the fuck up.
His friend had been killed the week before, and Jason thought that he wouldn't make it home.
There's an American base, I can never remember where it is, but he left Afghanistan and then went to this American base, and when he stepped off the plane, he touched the ground and he was just amazed that he'd got out of there because he never expected to.
But he wasn't the same person. As far as I'm concerned, he was pretty much killed in Afghanistan. Jace was.
When he came back, Jason obsessed over the audio recording of those moments in the drainage ditch with the Taliban fighter.
He played that audio constantly over and over for hours on end, analysing every movement, every shot, and trying to find fault in his army behaviour. And he couldn't, he was clear of that, but he was haunted by that tape.
Why do you think he did that? You were saying he was trying to find fault, but he's the one that came out alive.
He wanted to figure out why and how he'd survived, because
he had survivor guilt.
Jason was traumatised by that incident when he returned, and it wasn't long before he ended up in hospital because he was suicidal. He went through a PTSD course, and then that was it with the Army.
I flew up and met him at Holsworthy in the car park. I think 2 or 3 of his unit guys came out and gave him a plaque that they'd made up and shook his hand, and that was the end of his army career in a car park.
Since then, Jason experienced all of the common PTSD symptoms: night terrors, flashbacks, insomnia, anger problems, self-medicating with alcohol, and depression, hypervigilance.
Yeah, I said at the funeral that he was a tortured soul. As his mum, I'm not relieved, I never will be relieved that he's not here anymore. But I try and take comfort that his soul is at rest.
Hack Triple J.
That's Leisha, the mother of Jason Grant, speaking there to Joe Lauder. If you're a veteran who needs help, or if you know one, you can call the Veteran and Veterans Families Counselling Service, VVCS, on 1800 011 046. You can also call Lifeline 13 11 14. They're always there if you need someone to talk to. Now, in the studio with us to talk about this, we've got Dr Jonathan Lane. He's a psychiatrist and a veteran who served 19 years with the Australian Army. John, how common is Jason's story?
G'day, Steve, and thanks for having me in. Look, unfortunately, Jason's story is all too common, and I wish it wasn't like that. But, like you said before, war can really have severe consequences on people that are involved in it. People die for a start, and then, injuries, all the other sorts of things. Not just the physical injuries, but then the mental injuries as well too. And I think it says a lot about the country in terms of how it deals with its veterans, those people who put their lives on the line for their country after they come back from some sort of a conflict, or even after they've just volunteered for this in the first place.
John, we're going to come back to you in a second, and if you're listening and this is an experience that resonates with you, I'd be really keen to have a chat with you about this as well. You can get us on 1300 0555 36 or send us a text 0439 757 555.
Hack. They just made it harder for him. Nobody was actually helping. They were making it harder.
Hack on Triple J.
When people return home with PTSD, as well as dealing with their mental health, they have to deal with the Departments of Veterans Affairs, DVA. DVA looks after veterans' pensions and payments if someone's injured on the job. Many say it's a long and complicated process. It's so complicated that vets need to have a trained advocate to help them lodge any claims. Joe Lauder has spoken to the loved ones of a soldier who say the process killed him. And just a warning, this is a story that discusses suicide.
Jessie was just a lot of fun, and I was really proud to be around somebody who had protected us. And for me, that was just, he was on a pedestal with me.
Connie Bogles met Jesse Bird 3 years ago. He was an ex-army guy and she admired that, but started to realise that it came with a dark side for Jesse.
When you go to bed at night and he's woken up and he's shaking, or he's in a wet sweat and he's telling me his dreams, I mean, that was pretty much straight away. As soon as Jesse moved in.
Jesse had joined the Army with the 1 RAR battalion in Townsville in 2007 and was deployed to Afghanistan 2 years later. When he came back, his family realised he was hiding some serious problems. Jesse's sister is Kate Bird.
Jesse kept a lot away from the family, and particularly me. He kept a lot in the dark with us as a family, and particularly me as his sister. He never wanted to worry me with anything that was going on. It really wasn't until he lived with me for a couple of months last year and I got to see the struggle.
Jesse quit the Army in 2012 and things went downhill. He was hypervigilant, he had severe night terrors, depression and anxiety, and he couldn't find a job. In 2014, after Connie started dating Jesse, he was finally diagnosed with PTSD and started getting help. But getting a diagnosis is just the first step when it comes to getting support from the Department of Veterans Affairs, or DVA.
It was really just horrible from the get-go because it was email after email repeating the same information, and Jesse just got fed up.
So many veterans who battle with the DVA system say making a claim for a pension or a payout is so complicated. The process is covered by 3 different bits of legislation. Veterans need to go to countless medical appointments for assessments to hand to DVA. Then they can also make claims for interim payments from their superannuation company through a whole nother process. There are people known as DVA advocates who go through these courses just to learn how to help people like Jesse submit their claims. Mark Johnston is one of those advocates.
So they're going to get all this paperwork thrown in front of them, all this information given to them. It's going to go in one ear, out the other, and they're jittery and all that stuff, and all they want to do is get out of the office. But the biggest problem is to provide them that expert advice of actually how to fill the forms out, and even just to sit down there and actually fill it out for them.
Mark's ex-defence as well and went through this process himself. Now he's on a DVA pension and spends his time helping others with their claims. So far he's helped about 128 people with over 70 current cases, and he thinks the process needs to be simplified.
I've stressed these concerns for a number of years, or even the beginning of the year, how insensitive letters are from the Department of Vet Affairs, and why is the process so hard? It is so hard.
Jesse Bird couldn't find work and was navigating the complex DVA system, and the only real money he was getting was from his parents.
Jesse was receiving $6.20 a fortnight from the department.
$6.20?
Yeah. For miscellaneous pharmaceuticals.
Despite a Defence OH&S report acknowledging Jesse had been exposed to psychological trauma, the DVA rejected his claim for permanent impairment in May, based on a psychiatric advice that his condition wasn't severe or stable enough to determine. A permanent impairment claim would have meant Jesse had payments for life, and Kate says the decision was crushing for him.
He, on top of being angry, I think you could hear he was broken.
If you're in the Defence Force, you're much less likely than the broader population to commit suicide, according to a recent report from the National Mental Health Commission. But it's a different story once you leave the armed forces. Young people who exit before turning 30 are 13% more likely to commit suicide than the rest of us. Jesse ended his life in his army jumper with his medals on display, as well as the rejection papers and DVA paperwork out on display.
Jesse's death was a statement, and it was a very clear statement.
If any veterans get any hope that something can change, then that's going to make me feel better.
Jason Grant's parents, who you heard from earlier, are also frustrated with how the Department of Veterans Affairs handled his case. DVA recognised the young vet's PTSD claim and he was on a pension, but he had to have 6 monthly reviews. Jason was also appealing his payout for PTSD. To be considered for a special rate disability pension, he needed 50 impairment points, and he was scored at 48.
It's just so wrong that they can spend millions and billions of dollars sending them over there, and they come back and they argue over stupid little trivial points.
Hack Triple J.
That's Ross Grant, Jason's dad, speaking to Joe Lauder. And if that was hard for you to listen to, Veterans and Veterans Family Counselling Service can be reached on 1800 01146, or you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Now, Hack invited the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Dan Tehan, onto the program. He declined, saying he'd ordered an urgent review of how these cases were handled, and due to privacy reasons, he wouldn't be able to comment. His office pointed us to the government response to a review into the services available to current and ex-Defence Force members, which has committed an extra $58 million in mental health funding. So if an eligible veteran needs treatment, the government will pay for it. It's also trying to limit the number of medical assessments vets need to have and make sure they leave Defence with all the right documents. The government's also spending $166 million to upgrade the DVA system. Jess has given us a call from the Gold Coast. Jess, you're friends with Jessie Bird's family. How did this experience affect them?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me on. I guess I worked very closely with Sophia Carlson, who is Brendan Bird's fiance. So yeah, it's just it was just really tough to see how this affected them in such a way, and it was just really hard to know that this was Jesse's only way out. This is the only way that he could see that he could improve his situation was by taking his own life. And, you know, I just really hate to know that he was pushed in that sort of corner from the DVA and by not receiving the type of support that he should have received. So it's just very hard.
Yeah, to get a bit deeper into that process and find out what happened with DVA, in the studio we've got Dr Jonathan Lane, a psychiatrist and veteran. He's spent 19 years serving with the Australian Army. John, for returned servicemen, how overwhelming, how scary is the process of trying to get compensation through DVA?
Look, it can be really, really overwhelming. And let's just make a distinction here between access to care versus compensation and incapacity payments and that sort of stuff. Because the government's initiatives in opening up free mental health care just have to be applauded, because at least people can get care while we're sorting the rest of the stuff out. But access to incapacity payments and compensation stuff takes weeks and weeks and weeks of work. And then that's just putting the paperwork in, and then it's a matter of waiting for them to actually get approved, and so on and so on. Shouldn't this be a pretty comprehensive process? I mean, what we're talking about here is, you know, lifetime compensation for these people. So we should be making sure that that's something that they really need. Absolutely, and there has to be due diligence, because we don't want people basically rorting the system. But this is the problem, that, you know, access to care is one thing, but access to support or entitlements should be something else entirely afterwards. You know, and Jesse's claim was denied because his condition wasn't stable yet. Now, you'd have to think he actually was stable, but in a permanently impaired, unstable sort of state. So it takes some time for people to get stability, and if you delayed the compensation process until 5 years or even 10 years after the claims have been made, gave people some financial security, actually gave them good access to treatment like the government's planning on doing, and then we had the treatment services available to do that for them, it would probably take a lot of the pressure off, you know, the compensation process and the drive for that, and therefore stop people rorting the system per se. Susie from Victoria's given us a call. Susie, you were in the Army, you sustained an injury. How did you go about getting compensation?
Yeah, hi Steve. I went through DVA for a claim. I essentially went nowhere. After a year and a half of dealing with DVA, dealing with my mental health, my paperwork wasn't sufficient enough, even though the doctors and physios signed them all. They just kept going around in circles with it, so I just gave up in the end.
Jesus. John, I want to bring you back in here. I mean, you're a veteran yourself. You spent 19 years in the Army, but you're also a medical professional. How did you go about dealing with DVA? Look, it's hard, and actually it's been 28 years now, mate. Look, it's just hard, and it can be really frustrating, you know, and there is so many different forms required for different things. On one of my patients, I'm on my 5th separate report for trying to clarify these things, because the legislation is so specific and the entitlements are so, you know, strict in terms of what people are available, you know, what they can access given their particular needs. And Jesse's a classic case of just not quite getting there,
but maybe not being assessed on the right thing and therefore failing to meet any of the standard that was needed.
That's all we've got time for on the show today. John, thank you so much for coming in and joining us.
No problems. Thank you again for having me.
That's Dr Jonathan Lane, a psychiatrist and veteran. He spent 19 years serving with the Australian Army. That is unfortunately all we've got time for on Hack Today. Linda is up next with Goodnight, so she will be taking you through the rest of your evening. I will catch you tomorrow.
On Triple J.